late to the daytime. She was moving to the baseline.
Hey, welcome. This is only the second YouTube video I've ever filmed in my life, so I apologize for any quirkiness. If it seems a little bit off, that's okay. My name is Peoples, or JR, or Mr. Peoples, depending on what capacity you know me. I am so excited to be here with you guys today. This class, or I should say this channel, is set up just to follow along with an AP World History class, but not just to follow along with an AP World History class. I'm hoping to give a little bit of the experience that my students get with me in a YouTube forum. History can be fun. History can be amazing. We can learn a lot of good stories. The purpose of this whole thing is that I found a decreasing amount of time that I have to really lecture on what we're covering in class. And so I was thinking that if we could do some kind of YouTube forum and, get the lecture out there, I can ask some questions, see what kind of responses we get in the classroom, possibly in the comment section. I don't think I'm going to have one for my first time out, but that will be something that's coming in the future possibly. I'm really excited about it. I plan on putting as much of myself in it as I can. For example, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 5 in Ways of the World. It is written by Dr. Robert Strayer, and Eric Nelson. This is the curriculum that our district decided to go with, or that we chose together. After looking at a bunch of different resources, it was kind of one of my favorites. And so this is what the students will do the bulk of their reading out of. And so we'll be talking about Chapter 5 today, which is Empire Building and the Americas, and talking about Spain. We'll talk a little bit about the English, a little bit about the Portuguese, and kind of the differences and what resulted because of those differences. We will also touch on Russia, China, and India, but not in as much depth as, say, Spain. Spain will be the focal point of what we're talking about today. But after that, I want to kind of talk to you guys about Aftershock Festival that I got to go to yesterday. I had an amazing time, and I'm really excited to tell you guys about it. But for now, let's just hop right into it. So when we talk about, European expansion and what led to the Euros going over to the Americas and kind of colonizing it, I would say some of the determining factors had to do with, rivalries between other European countries, the extreme competitive nature of the Indian Ocean trade. Also, if you consider the proximity, Europe is so much closer to the Americas than, say, China or Japan or any of those kind of regions, that it just led itself to be colonized by the Europeans. So, if we look at it, first and foremost, it was attractive for the Spanish because of labor, agriculture, resources, all of those fun things really made it something that the Spanish were into and were interested in getting into. We also have some different factors that led to it within the European culture itself. If you think of the rise of the European culture right around the 16th century, you start to see this growth of this merchant class, these people that are making money selling goods that are being brought in, being imported by foreign countries. We also, like I said, the European rivalries, we had missionaries. Missionaries lots of times sought to leave religious persecution. We saw a lot of that in America, but it also happened in other regions. So, first and foremost, let's talk about Spain. Let's talk about the Aztecs. Let's talk about Hernan Cortez. So, Spain was originally seen by a guy named Bernal Diaz. Diaz went to Tenochtitlan and, showed up, saw it, wrote a letter back to Queen Isabella and was like, this place is beautiful. They have an amazing marketplace, detailing all of the things the Aztecs had going for them. And all of those things relate into how Cortez sought to conquer the Aztec Empire and what is now today Mexico down into Central America, all the way looking down into Peru, Chile, that area down there. So the one thing that the Spanish had when they started to take over the region is what they would do is Cortez was a master at this, is that he would conquer a village after conquering that village, he would then indoctrinate those that were willing to fight for his cause. A little water. All right. So he started indoctrinating these people, and they began to fight for the Spanish just as much, or more so than the Spaniards themselves. And so you started to see this rising embodiment of what was the Spanish army, and about the Spaniards and their conquest of the Americas, or at least the Central Americas, what we now know as like California, Mexico, down all the way to Chile, which mostly encompassed Peru when you talk about South America, and the Incas, and the conquering of the Aztecs as well. So when we talk about Cortez, Hernan Cortez was a conquistador. He was also known associate of Bernal Diaz, who wrote the letter to Queen Isabella, talking about how great the Aztec Empire was. Well, Cortez realized that the one resource that these areas had over some of these other colonial pieces is the people themselves, the civilization, right? So if you think about it, if you needed labor, what's better than a place that already has the labor? And so that's what Cortez saw. And that's what Cortez really wanted to kind of take over. And what he ended up doing was, as he would conquer a specific village of peoples, he would indoctrinate either by force or by coercion, or simply just letting them know that it's better for them to join up than to fight against the Spanish, who had much more technologically advanced weapons of methods of war. And so this is what we see. One kind of story about that would be Doña Marina. So she was this Native American young girl, about 14 years old. She was from an elite culture, or at least an elite family within the culture, somewhere between the Aztec Empire and the Mayan Empire. It's not the Mayan Empire at this point, but there was sporadic Mayan groups or tribes within that region. And so somewhere within that piece, her family lived, and so her mother remarried after her father passed, and because of that kind of patriarchal ideal that the land must go to the son, she ends up getting sold to a Mayan chieftain south. This Mayan chieftain was one of the ones that was conquered by Cortez. And so after being sold into slavery to this Mayan chieftain at an extraordinarily young age, this bright, beautiful young girl then is given to Hernan Cortez as a gift. So these conquistadors, the Spanish army, they had a habit of baptizing these girls, because it was seen as unclean to touch anyone that was not baptized into the Christian faith or the Catholic religion. And so they would baptize these girls, that way they could have physical relationships with them. And so Doña Marina, she was one that was extraordinarily bright. She spoke both Aztec and Mayan along with Spanish, all self-taught. Cortez saw the value in her immediately, and so he began to use her as a translator for him with these smaller indigenous cultures. As they continued to talk about, continued to grow and expand and gather more troops, he started to see the value in her as not just an interpreter, but as an advisor, as someone that he could ask questions. How should we take control of these people? What do I need to do to make sure that we're doing this as efficient as possible? And she was really good at her job. However, her story is so interesting. So as she works along with Cortez, she becomes his mistress. Shocker, right? So he becomes her mistress. They actually carry a son together, and she gives birth to this son. However, Cortez is already married. His wife is in Spain. And so rather than, because, divorce in the Catholic Church was something that was not possible at the time. And so what he does is he takes his son, takes him back to Spain, and then gives her away to marry one of his soldiers and live in Mexico and kind of preside over a region within Mexico. And so some people would see that as like, oh my gosh, she got screwed so bad. Like, you know, she must have loved him. I'm not. I know she did have love for him. However, I mean, how much love? Who knows? I know that she did say that, you know, she would rather serve Cortez, her husband, than to have all of New Spain or Mexico region. But what kind of story it is that it shows that these bright women were still under the foot of this patriarchal society, this continuance of that kind of model. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting the way that worked. Okay, let's move on. So that's one example that you could use if a question along the AP exam was something like, to what extent did the patriarchal society continue through colonial Americas? Doña Marina would be a perfect story for that. It's in the book. It's on page 204. Great story, really fun to read, really easy to read. Hopefully, I know that our class read it, and hopefully you continue to look at that. So one of the problems with this indigenous culture that the Europeans kept encountering, and not just by war did they die, of course, right? So we had these two things kind of happen, and the first of that is the Great Dying. Sounds super fun, and I know it seems like it's like, yay, great dying. What a great topic for your first YouTube video, right? But what I would tell you is that it changed the world quite literally in some people's opinion. So within the first 50 years of Columbus landing in the Caribbean, we saw nearly all of the Caribbean people, indigenous people, die, right? And so that is a huge number of people that ended up passing within the Caribbean. Okay. Also, if you think about Central Mexico's numbers fluctuate between somewhere from 10 to 20 million pre-Columbus. Okay. Then you go about 60 years later, and the indigenous population is only about 1 million. Most of that can be contributed to disease or war. Okay, those are the two factors that really hurt them. They did not have the immunities ready for this kind of thing. Okay, the Dutch and the English colonies had a similar number when it comes to what was going on with them. The Portuguese as well. And so what ended up happening was these colonists really kind of, you know, a lot of them saw it as a way, as God making way for them for this new land so they could grow the faith and things like that. And so that was kind of the mentality when they would see these indigenous people passing, is like, you know, yeah, they're passing because they are not Christians. Okay, and then from that we had this thing called the Little Ice Age start to take place, and we saw the earth start to cool down. Some scientists actually believe that because of the loss of life in the Americas and the reduction of people and the reduction of burning of trees and the agricultural methods that were used by those indigenous people, that we actually saw the earth cool down. So when we talk about, you know, Greta Thunberg and these ideas of climate change, that climate change has been going on for a long time, and the human effect on it may or may not be there. But this is just another kind of thing to think about when you look at those kind of topics. Columbian Exchange. Okay, so what the Columbian Exchange basically was a shortage of labor, and a shortage of labor mostly in places like the Caribbean, up into North America, right, where the United States resides. So Europeans brought domestic animals, plants, kinds of agriculture, and with these few predators, the Americas had very few natural predators to things like oxen. And so once you bring those kind of animals over, they flourished, and we really saw an increase in agriculture. Horses ended up kind of transfusing into a lot of the Native American lifestyle, especially when you talk about the North American lifestyle and the Sioux Indians and those kind of things. They really gravitated toward those horses and fighting on horses, very similar to the way the Mongols fought.